Hi, everybody. My name is Anna, and today I will be doing a cultural competency training on the Native American population. So starting with kind of a background of Native American history. So approximately 12,000 years ago, the ancestors of what we know today as Native Americans traveled by foot from Asia to what's known as Alaska, across the Bering Land Bridge. Um, by the time that European colonizers came to America, approximately 10 million individuals were living here. And over the next several centuries, European diseases, wars, and the Indian Removal Act dramatically reduced the native population. Infectious diseases were estimated to kill approximately 95% of the indigenous population during the initial colonization of America. And these diseases included smallpox, the plague, chickenpox, cholera, measles, tuberculosis, as well as a variety of other diseases, including sexually transmitted infections. Um, the Trail of Tears, which was the forcible removal processes and deaths, often by gunpoint, also contributed to a large proportion of the population passing away. Kind of primary instances to recognize include the 1836 Creek Voyage to Oklahoma, during which 3,500 people passed away, and the 1838 voyage from Georgia across the Mississippi River, during which 5,000 Cherokee people passed away. Um, Several wars also took place. These included the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, which began in 1756 and ended in 1763. This war originated over a dispute over the British and French settling of the Ohio River Valley, primarily when it came to trade purposes. Britain ended up winning the war, and the Treaty of Paris was signed, which resulted in the relinquishment of the French colonies. And then disputes between the British Army and Native American populations led to the Pontiac War. Years later, the American Revolution occurred, and that contributed to large outbreaks of diseases. And then that contributed to an inability to hunt and provide for the Native American populations, which ultimately led to greater dependency and reliance on the trading economy and on the traders and colonizers. The Indian Appropriations Act in 1851 created reservations, and it prevented Native Americans from leaving those sites without permission. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act was passed, and that granted citizenship to all Native Americans who were born within American territory. In 1968, the Indian Civil Rights Act was passed, and that granted tribes many of the same benefits that were found in the Bill of Rights for American citizens. And then the American Indian Religious Freedom Act granted rights to land and controlled substances for religious ceremonies and traditions. The Native Americans populations primarily define religion as the relationship between living people and other persons or beings, visible entities, mythic beings, etc. This religion and the religious practices that occur vary across the different tribes and populations, but many Native populations will worship a great or master spirit, as well as a hierarchy of other lesser supernatural entities. And these will vary in gender and form by tribe or belief system. Many tribes also believe in immortality and afterlife. However, they don't believe in the duality of heaven and hell. It's rather that the afterlife will have an abundance of the good things that make earthly life enjoyable and pleasant. There are a variety, as I mentioned, of belief systems and religions across the tribes and nations, but there are several similarities and themes that exist. And these include spirits, or the belief that there are powers or entities that move in all things, including animals, humans, plants. And morality means living in harmony and balance with all of the beings and things of the earth. Place is also important. Spiritualities and sacred energy are believed to be present in physical locations and sites, which often means that there are ceremonies or practices that are localized to specific locations. Participation is another key aspect of religion. So it's not necessarily the intelligence or the fundamental understanding, rather than, and more so, it's the engagement in ceremonies and traditions. And that's kind of how religious activity is measured, is more so with the participation rather than like the base foundational understanding. Connection is also a very important aspect. Native American populations generally believe that human beings are connected to land and all the living things within the natural world. And there's a strong emphasis on community and connection. And it's extremely important to have unity and conformity and to be balanced with both the tribe and the population and the world at large. Some other kind of key facts to mention is that there generally isn't a central figure, such as Jesus or Buddha or a holy book, but there is generally the Great Spirit that we mentioned earlier, and that name varies depending on the different tribe or nation that we're reviewing. The Great Spirit is generally believed to be a universal energy that's present in the creations of all of the natural world. So that includes wind, water, plants, and animals. But kind of the base and fundamental aspect of it is that it cannot be presented in human form, and it's available across the world and across all things at all times. They also don't believe in a punishing or judgmental or mean creator. It's more so kind and loving, and a focus on joy and wonder and love. And religion, as we mentioned, there's not a holy book or centralized writings generally. It's generally done through oral communication that's passed down across generations. Other key cultural values include family networks, conformity and sameness or unity, respect for elders, generosity, courage, and individual freedom, as well as a focus on holistic beliefs and systems. And it's important to note as well that individual morality and reputation is more so based off of the person's willingness and fulfillment of responsibilities in helping and serving their tribe. Um, and on just being connected and supporting. So in terms of traditions and practices, as mentioned earlier, there are a variety of tribes and nations within the Native American population, and the specific ceremonies or traditions will vary based on which tribe we're looking at. But in general, there's a strong emphasis on herbal and medicinal plants, and those are used for general health, for healing, for ceremonies. And then in terms of ceremonies, there are a few different things that can happen, including fasting, singing, prayer, drumming circles, dancing. There's also an emphasis on rites of passage, which focus on changing of status. So there'll be rites of passage for different ages, for going through puberty, and those will include initiation ceremonies, and that can include things such as feasts, festivals, and rituals. And then there's also, as we mentioned earlier, a strong focus on oral narratives. So passing down traditional knowledge, creation stories, and beliefs through speaking and communicating. In terms of holidays, again, this will vary by tribe, but these often tend to center on celebrating nature, spirits, or the spirit world and ancestors, and then honoring the sun, rain, and crops and other things that are necessary for survival. So honoring and also providing gratitude. Some of these ceremonies and holidays include Soil, which is celebrated by the Zuni and Hopido, and that occurs on December 22nd, and it welcomes the sun back after winter, and it emphasizes renewal and purification. There's also 3 different dances that are done throughout the year for the Tiwa tribe, and that includes the turtle dance to honor and remember creation, the deer dance to represent femininity and masculinity, and then buffalo dance, which is to support healing and to celebrate life. Generally, depending on the tribe, holidays are celebrated over a week rather than a single day, and this will include rituals. And then there's often also activity or dietary restrictions, and as healthcare providers, it's important to be aware of those when creating treatment plans. So when we talk about diet, let's talk a little bit about traditional historical Native American diets, and then we'll move into current. So before there was any contact with European colonizers, the original indigenous populations generally had a diet that was complex carbohydrates, generally included harvesting seeds, nuts, other fruits and vegetables, and then hunting animal meat and using those organs, oils, and flesh. And then food was often dried, smoked, and stored. And that really just depended on what geographical region the tribes were living in terms of what specific foods or meats they were eating. Once the colonizers came to America, they brought sheep, goats, cattle, pig, wheat, and then a variety of different fruits that were introduced to the diet of Native Americans. And then once the federal government was more established, this unfortunately led to the destruction of many traditional sources of food, including intentional killing of buffalo to prevent Native Americans from having the food that they needed, destroying farming lands. And then Native Americans were told by the government to discontinue hunting and gathering. And instead, they were provided food rations. And that included canned meats, lard, flour, sugar, coffee. And unfortunately, this kind of contributed to a reliance on these more processed foods and government support, which ultimately has negatively impacted the Native American populations. Currently, diets of Native Americans will generally include common use of butter, lard, and fat, whole milks, and a lot of fried foods, including fried meats and fried vegetables. There tends to be excessive consumption of processed snacks and sweet foods. And there's also high levels of soft drinks, and this includes sodas and those things. There's also disproportionate rates of drinking and alcohol consumption in this population, and then a lower intake of fruits and vegetables and a high intake of fats and carbohydrates. And the diet of Native Americans, there's a few different issues that are at play. And these include food deserts, food insecurity, and then systemic issues, which have ultimately contributed to high rates of obesity and diabetes in Native American populations. Food deserts are defined as areas of a city or rural area where there is a lack of fresh fruits and vegetables available, and then a high level or ratio of processed foods, convenience foods, and those kinds of stores rather than like markets and grocery stores. And then in terms of food insecurity, 1 in 4 Native households do not have access to nutritious food. And that can be whether it's because of financial reasons, and so not having enough money to purchase those things, or because there is a general lack of that healthy food because of food deserts. And this is amplified by the poverty rate. So more than 1/3 of the Native American families in America that are living in reservations are living in poverty, which is significantly higher than the national average of 9.2%. And we can see that kind of graphic on the right of the disproportionate impacts of food insecurity across the races. Factors to be aware of as healthcare providers include fasting. So as mentioned earlier, fasting can be done during ceremonies and different times, rites of passage, and it also can be done for spiritual revelation. And so individuals who are ill should obviously be receiving support and encouragement to consume food, but we can always recommend or support that their loved ones fast on their behalf. And then it's also important to note that fasting is done for toxin cleansing as well in the body. Native Americans may also request traditional foods during ceremonial times. This can include things such as teas, and recommendations for that. So generally, we want to follow the traditional recipes as closely as possible. And then if needed, we can kind of adjust those to meet the dietary requirements of our treatment plans. And it's important to work together with the patient on that and make sure that they feel comfortable and respected and validated in their concerns, and that everything is done in a mutual, respectful way. In terms of view of health, so Native American populations generally view health and well-being as very closely connected to Earth, and generally that is defined as living in harmony with the environment. So a healthy individual is someone whose body and whose behaviors are in harmony with the universe and with nature, as well as with the spirit world. And health and healing practices are generally assessed by the medicine wheel or sacred hoop. There's a few different names for it depending on the tribe, and you can see that on the right. And that includes 4 different directions: north, east, south, and west. And those can be used to represent seasons, stages of life, and ultimately to show the importance of holistic approaches and of balancing body, mind, heart, and soul when healing. Another really important phrase in the Native American population when it comes to health is to walk in beauty or to walk in a sacred way. And beauty in this phrase equates to balance. And circles of beauty can include communities, family, living creatures, earth, air, fire, and more. But ultimately, once again, the focus is on that balance and harmony with the person and everything around them in the natural world. When it comes to the view and treatment of illnesses, illnesses are generally treated by medicine men and women, shamans, and healers, and these people are believed to have special gifts by the Great Spirit that allows them to provide spiritual healing, power, and renewal, and to help the earthly communities around them. Healing practices are intended to stabilize and balance, once again, both physical and spiritual health. And it's believed that the more people are present, the more healing energy is available. And so this introduces the importance of the participation and that community involvement in these ceremonies in order to provide healing. And once again, oral traditions come into play here, where these healing practices are passed down from one healer to the next. And these are often shrouded kind of in secrecy to protect the sacred nature of the practices. So some examples of the treatment of illnesses include purification and cleansing of the body. And this can be done through things such as sweat lodges, which we can see in the image on the right. And these are ceremonial saunas where stones are on a fire and they're used to create steam and heat. And then that's an enclosed structure. And that's done to connect the individuals with the creator and with nature to purify their body, mind, and spirit. Smudging is also another common practice where people or specific locations are cleansed using the fragrant smoke of sacred plants. And once again, this is to purify, heal, and then restore balance and harmony, whether that's in the person or in the location that they're in. Herbs and medicinal plants are also very common. So this includes teas, tinctures, and salves. And tinctures are an herbal extract where plant material such as a root or bark is soaked in an alcohol or alcohol water mixture for 6 weeks or more, to help extract that herbal essence in that liquid. Traditionally, Native American populations believe that illness originates from spiritual imbalances, or that it's an indicator that there are supernatural forces at play. So ultimately, an illness or any type of injury is an indication that there's a lack of unity and balance in that person, and that they are beginning to fall out of step with the forces of the universe and with nature. Some tribes and nations also believe that illnesses come from angry spirits. And so that's when a healer would come into play to help perform a ritual or to use their healing powers to appease those spirits and that anger. Once again, the most important element of wellness in this population is the spirit. So any physical healing, for example, if there's a broken limb, that should be treated by a physician for that physical injury. And then there should also be a spiritual healing to care for the spirit. And that's generally going to be done by a medicine man or woman. And so it's really important to have that duality of both physical and spiritual healing and recognition. In terms of what to be aware of as a healthcare provider treating this population, first, it's important to note that while many tribes allow blood transfusions and transplantation of organs, there are some that don't, such as the Navajo. Male circumcision is generally rare. Abortion practices vary depending on the tribe. It's usually not recommended if there's a terminal patient to keep them in life support if they're in a vegetative state. End of life, and also just throughout an illness or injury, it's very common to have prayers, encouraged to have family and community presence and to have those healing ceremonies. So that should be something that you are prepared for and able to support with. And then autopsies are generally not encouraged, but if there is a requirement by law, then they are considered acceptable. So as mentioned, this presentation was created with the intention of helping to better understand and be more culturally competent and sensitive when treating Native American populations. Specifically, this will be targeted for physicians that are treating these populations. And there's a few things to note when providing care. So first, it's important just to remember the history of the Native American populations. And as we've mentioned, there's a few different things that we want to be conscious of when we're treating. And that's beginning with the forced assimilation, which was the disruption which led to the disruption and elimination of many aspects of traditions, culture, and community. Many healing rituals, medical care strategies, diet and lifestyle, and even the community and school environments were disrupted and even eliminated. And so as a result, it's very important that as healthcare providers, we respect and honor the remaining traditions and beliefs and the agency of this population, because they've had such a devastating history of having that taken away from them. It's also important to be aware of and conscious of medical mistrust. And as we've seen, there has been several broken promises and instances of the government and medical community harming or negatively impacting the health of Native Americans, including the failure to allocate enough resources, the wars, the relocations, and different things that have happened. And many individuals have experienced discrimination or witnessed mistreatment of community members from both the government and healthcare community. So as a result, Native Americans are much more likely to agree than other races that and ethnicities that medical professionals harm patients, and that they are at risk of not being listened to and not being able to consent to different treatments or experimental studies. And so as a result, we need to be very conscious of that. We need to be communicating clearly, ensuring that the patients are aware that everything that is happening is within their control, that they have the agency, and that we're here to help and support them, and to work together with them rather than to tell them what to do or take away their ability to heal in the way that they would like to heal. It's also important, again, to talk about the historical trauma. So as we mentioned, the forced relocation, government possession and destruction of land, genocides. And then another important thing to remember is, especially when we're talking about treatments and experimental treatments, there is a history of Native American youth being abducted and being sent to boarding schools without consent. And then to also have been subjected to medical experimentation, such as unnecessary surgeries, experimental drugs and vaccines, or the withholding of treatments. And that those traumatic experiences and events have led to a historical trauma within this population. And understanding this context is extremely important to being able to provide culturally competent and informed care. And we'll go into a few of those strategies now. So some methods to keep in mind include utilizing trauma-informed care frameworks. And this really focuses on restoring healing, safety, power, self-worth, and efficacy and agency to these patients. And so this is where we'll really want to focus on communicating and collaborating and integrating their culture and practices to the treatment plans that we're creating for them. It's also important to partner with local leaders and traditional healers, and that collaboration will develop both rapport and trust with the rest of the community, and also help us to be more informed and to guide our practices as we treat members of their community. It's also important to adjust our language to match both the health literacy and cultural values of the populations that we're serving. So this includes asking and using the preferred pronouns of our patients, and then learning key phrases of their population or of their specific tribe, such as their birth, reproductive, and death customs, and then bringing those up, acknowledging those, and incorporating those into the treatment plans that we create. And once again, that comes into play when we talk about learning and adapting to the cultural traditions and practices of these populations. And so with the help of local leaders, with our communication with our patients, it's important to understand what holidays and ceremonies they utilize, and then to be conscious of those when we're prescribing, creating medication plans or treatment plans, and making sure that they have the space to perform those ceremonies. A good strategy for that is to create or maintain a specific location in our health clinic or in our hospital where patients and their families can have the privacy to perform ceremonies of healing. There's a couple different models that we can use. So the first one is the respect model, and that includes respect. So understanding the identity and values of culture for that patient. The explanatory model, which is devoting time again to understand their perception of symptoms and problems, What do they believe about their experiences and what's causing their symptoms or what's causing their illness, and how does this compare to our perception? Acknowledging their socio-cultural context, so assessing and recognizing how different factors are at play and how those are impacting their health, and how those will impact their understanding and ability to follow the treatment plans that we're creating. Power, so acknowledging the power differences between us and the patients, and then working to bridge that gap and put us on more of an even playing field. Expressing empathy and validating concerns is extremely important, and that's done both verbally and non-verbally. And then ensuring that we're understanding the root fears, concerns, and eliciting those apprehensions from our patients. And that can be done using open-ended questions, motivational interviewing techniques, and then understanding those barriers to care so that we can address them. And then once again, trust is one of the most important things. So building trust and rapport and emphasizing respect, validation, and then once again, that collaboration and unity with our patients. Another model that we can use is the LEARN model. So once again, we're listening with empathy. We're trying to understand their perception of the issue and the root causes. We're explaining our perception of those issues and related causes, acknowledging and respectfully discussing the differences and similarities. And then we're recommending a culturally sensitive and tailored treatment plan. And then once again, we're negotiating. So we're communicating with them and collaborating with them to agree and adjust our treatment plan to match their needs and their values. And so this should be a joint effort between us and the patient with respect, empathy, validation, in order to create and finalize a treatment plan that both of us are mutually happy with and both agree upon. So some specific practices that we can implement as healthcare providers and to keep in mind include, so many Native American patients and populations will carry sacred items with them. This can include things like stones and feathers or pouches of cloth and leather. It's very important that we are not touching those, that those are kept with the patient at all times, especially in emergency situations, that they have access to those and that those are provided to them and not touched by us. Additionally, when families or loved ones are performing ceremonies, it's best practice for us to leave the room and offer them that privacy unless we are invited or asked to stay within. And then, as mentioned earlier, it's a very good idea to have a private, separate space available specifically for those ceremonies to take place. Native Americans also value modesty. So when possible, hospital clothing or hospital robes should not be exposing anything to other people. They should be having that privacy and that ability to clothe themselves fully in the way that they're comfortable with. It's also important to ask for permission before taking any photographs. So any imagery processes like scans or MRIs should be fully explained, and they should have the ability to fully consent to those and be made comfortable before those are done. And then especially when we're talking about amputation, so there are a lot of different traditions and practices that can come into play there. So it's extremely important to understand that specific person, their tribe, and their religious beliefs related to that. So some traditions, they might include blessing and then cremating that limb so that that can be buried with the patient at time of death. So it's very important before any decisions are made to get the consent of the person, to understand what their preferences are of what will be done with that limb afterwards, or with that body part afterwards. That way their appropriate traditions and practices can be done and performed. Some other culturally sensitive traditions to keep in mind include greeting with gentle handshakes. Also often a tradition or a expectation that you're not making eye contact with the respected elders and leaders. So another thing to keep in mind, so gentle handshakes, avoiding eye contact of respected elders, ensuring that there is translation services available for those who speak their traditional languages. And then it's often preferred that the same gender is used for patients. So a male doctor or nurse should be treating a male patient if possible, and then female doctor or nurse should be treating female patients. And then once again, respect and listening is very important. So many tribes and Native American populations view intelligence or measure intelligence by somebody's ability to listen and hear. So it's extremely important to not interrupt and to provide ample time for patients to share their experiences, their needs, and their thoughts, and then to listen and validate those. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you so